Hello and welcome to Horizon, where we look at how the stories of today affect your tomorrow. Our first story, and this is just pretty recent news, is that the head of Kingdom Holdings, which is a really large kind of private equity arm with inside Saudi Arabia, Prince Alawid bin Talil has been arrested. And this is a really big deal because he is really a driving force behind the Saudi Aramco, which is Saudi Arabia's national oil holding arm, IPO, and he has now been arrested on supposedly corruption charges. And what is not clear is this a backlash against his largely flamboyant lifestyle? Is this he's actually been really corrupt in a lot of his business dealings? It's really unsure what's going to come out of this, or if this is really just a power play by the rising Crown Prince Salman, who is, on one hand, a definite liberalizer and trying to kind of rein in some of Saudi Arabia's more orthodox elements, or is he really just trying to consolidate power around himself? And there seems to really be two distinct camps, and this one seems to be more leaning on a power play to consolidate power and push someone out who really has kind of been Saudi Arabia's voice to the outside, an early investor in Snap, investor in Uber and Citigroup, and really just trying to increase returns, shown a lot of success. And so it's unsure of, like, is this going to affect the Saudi Aramco IPO? Is this going to affect the input that Kingdom Holdings has in a lot of multinational corporations? It's still very early, but it's definitely going to put a lot of people on notice that business as usual in Saudi Arabia may be over. Now, looking here in the U.S., the big story on Monday was Paul Manafort's arrest. And while this was certainly celebrated in some liberal circles, I think that the real word of caution people need to take is whenever this moves to trial, what this will likely be a case of is not necessarily guilty or innocence, which is the mistake that a lot of people make in a criminal justice proceeding. It will more likely be whether the prosecution can truly prove beyond a reasonable doubt that Paul Manafort is guilty of these charges that he stands accused of. And the reason is because the way that they acquired a lot of this information seems to be a little bit questionable. With the no-knock raid, which yes, they did get approval for, but you could certainly make a case that is that really the system that we want to live in, because that's a totalitarian measure. That some of their sources and some of the people that they're going to potentially use to accuse Paul Manafort may not necessarily be the most reliable. And I think that the overall investigation that is being run by Robert Mueller right now is just on a little bit of an uneasy ground, because what this was supposed to do was really focus on primarily Russian interference in the U.S. election, but now seems to have an unlimited scope. And this was one of the concerns that people had going into this investigation, was if you do not sort of put up guardrails and say you are just going to investigate this one specific focus, then you can have what you've had now, where it's just, okay, well, you got to find someone who's guilty, so you justify an arrest. And it's not to say that Mr. Manafort is guilty or innocent. It's more likely that this trial will probably have a very hard time actually resulting in a guilty verdict, just because of a lot of the extenuating circumstances that surround it. And all that happens that the defense team needs to do is prove some reasonable doubt. And this happens way more in white-collar crimes, the people who can afford really good legal teams, than it does in kind of lower inside of justice, which is where you're seeing a lot of the push for criminal reform. So I think an early prediction I have is that he will probably be proven not guilty. Doesn't necessarily mean he's guilty or innocent, just that the result of that case will probably be a not guilty verdict, unless he takes a plea deal, which could certainly happen. So we'll have to see that. And then kind of keeping in kind of the government space is Jerome Powell was named the new Fed chair. And this is, again, more Trump just really being Trump, wanting to put his own sort of unique spin on something, but is largely indifferent from the policies of Janet Yellen. So probably won't be a lot of changes, maybe a slight interest rate hike, which could get people back into savings in banks versus kind of right now of being more an equity-driven environment. But I think that it's largely perceived by the market as, whatever. And another kind of thing that's happening with money and moving money around would be Robert Mercer, who is head of Renaissance Technology, was a huge backer of Trump and Breitbart News. He is essentially retreating kind of back into the shadows. I think that one of the things he was really going for was trying to be a less public, almost conservative George Soros, and he really just couldn't handle the heat. And I think he also, too, is not really thrilled with kind of the degree that Breitbart and Trump and really a lot of this has pursued, and really just kind of wants to retreat to the private life. He's going to let his daughter, I believe her name is Rebecca, take over a lot of this ownership stake and manage it, and I think allow him to take a step back. And this is going to be interesting of whether he can truly take a step back even though his interest isn't, directly there, or if he's going to want to still play but less publicly. So we'll see. It's kind of a little bit unknown. I think, again, with kind of conservative mega donors, their sort of role or involvement is less clear than it is necessarily with liberal mega donors who are either A, very public, or B, it's a little bit easier to trace, okay, this is your organization that you have funded that is trying to accomplish this goal. Outside of the Koch brothers, a lot of the conservative donors don't necessarily just have the reputation or the discussion that you see otherwise. So we'll see. And the final story is something that I'm personally pretty excited about, which is the fact that Bowe Bergdahl will not be going to prison. Now, the reason I think this is a good thing is, look, he suffered a lot under the Taliban. He suffered from a lot of mental disorders, and I think I highly recommend, if you haven't, to watch season 2 of Serial, which kind of tried to explore both sides, both the people who went searching for him, the kind of the overall commanding army officers, and really Bowe Bergdahl's perspective himself. And I think there was just a lot of losers in this entire story. And, yes, people died, yes, people were seriously wounded, but sending Mr. Bergdahl to jail really accomplishes very little other than to say, okay, well, at least we punished him. And I don't really think that justice is served for anyone. So it's a very unfortunate circumstance about what happened, both his capture and trying to find him. But I think it says a lot that, we try to move past that and say, look, mistakes were made. Ultimately putting him in jail serves no one's interest, and hopefully we can move forward. Hopefully there's some healing. Honestly, even though it's probably unlikely to happen, it'd be great if somehow Bowe Bergdahl's experience could be used to better prepare troops going overseas, explore ways to kind of prevent that happening in the future, and really address the mental illness that arises from serving in a conflict zone. And that's all we have for this week. Hope you have a great week, and we hope to see you back next time. Thanks.